Hey guys, this is lesson 3 over Age of Reform. So we're going to continue our notes. You're just going to draw a line underneath yesterday's notes. And what we're going to be covering today is what we call the Abolitionist Movement. Now, the Abolitionist Movement deals with trying to free the slaves, okay? It is anti-slavery. So I decided I'm going to try this so that you can pause it at any time to finish the notes. I'm not going too fast. You don't miss something. So this is why I'm going to do it this way. I want to try something a little bit different. So we're going to start off with abolitionists. And there's going to be 4 of them that we need to know. If you would, put abolitionists over on the left side. And what an abolitionist is. These are groups that were mainly in the North that worked to end slavery. A lot of them were made up of women. The men that was a part of it were usually probably a preacher, they were a Quaker, or somebody that was actually very highly educated. The first guy to show here is William Lloyd Garrison, and he created his own anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator. And he would report on what was going on in the South with slavery. They wanted to inform people. He was also did speeches all around the New England area, and that's actually where he meets the next guy, and it's an escaped slave named Frederick Douglass. So Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave. He learned how to read and write at a young age. He was actually half African American and half white. His father was his master, and this was something that was not uncommon, but definitely was not publicized about the relationships that were had. But he does become one of the main abolitionists, one of the main speakers against slavery, and he actually ends up meeting President Lincoln later on. Now, I'm going to give you a second. I want you to make sure you do have these notes, and then we'll move on to the next one. All right. If you need to pause it this time to finish it, and then let's move on to the next one. Okay. So the other 2 abolitionists are the women. First one we have is her name is Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth. So she changed her name. She was a slave, a runaway slave, and she made it her life goal to travel and tell people about the truth about slavery. Um, she had a very famous speech that was called "Ain't I a Woman," and she became a very good speaker. Traveled all out west to tell her story and to tell about the problems of women and about anti-slavery. The next person wasn't a speaker, but she was a writer, and her name is Harriet Beecher Stowe. And she wrote a novel that was called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And what this did was it kind of brought the attention onto slavery. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe was from the North. Her father was a preacher. Her family was very anti-slavery. They were in the abolitionist movement. She really hadn't had any kind of interaction with slaves until one day she went down to, I think it was Tennessee, and she happened to see a slave auction. And that really kind of shook her because she had never seen anything that was so vile as to see somebody being sold up on an auction block like an animal. So, what happens is she writes this book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it becomes a worldwide bestseller. Now, here is it was a student's work of art or work project, and it kind of explains exactly how this becomes so big. She becomes a hero in the North, but she becomes almost a villain, somebody hated in the South. 1851, this book was written, and then in the South, they were outraged. They did not like what was written in there. They thought that she made up all these stories. And she may have heard the stories, but it is still fiction. It is still a made up character on a plantation. But the stories is something that she had heard, and she just kind of wrote it into like one character. Now, the people in the north that were reading it, they were like her. They didn't really know what was going on down south with slavery until they read her book, and they were outraged. They were upset. They were sickened by what was going on against another human being. So, the book actually goes on and becomes a worldwide bestseller. So around the world, people find out what's happening in the South. The South hate it because they are getting some really kind of bad publicity on this thing. Then, as you can see at the bottom right over here, this is actually what Lincoln says to her. So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war. Talking about the Civil War, the North versus the South. That's how big this book blew up. Alright, now, last part is going to be the Underground Railroad. So we need to know about the abolitionists, and we need to know how did they get the slaves from the South and over to free territory. Notice I said free territory and not just the North. Look at that map. You can see that there's other places that people are going. These slaves aren't just going up north. They're just trying to find any place, even Mexico, where they can run away and live in a free territory. So, Underground Railroad was set up by abolitionists. It was a series of paths and hiding places that runaway slaves could use to get to the north and or Canada. They even tried Mexico, the Bahamas. They went to Cuba. So that's where a lot of them were trying to head, was just in places where they could become free. Another thing is that Underground Railroad, it wasn't an actual railroad. If that's what you're thinking. It's not. It was just code so that the South would be looking for, the plantation owners and the other people that are down south would be looking for a railroad or somebody like that, when it was just a path from point A to point B. Now you had what were called conductors. A conductor would be someone that would help show the runaways which way to go during the night. And so they would usually travel by the water to help kind of cover the scent from the dogs in case there's any kind of hounds that were following them. They had slave hunters out there, so they had to find any way possible to cover their scent, and usually they had to travel in the water. Then they go from one location to the next, usually a house. That house would have like a room that was boarded away so that they could hide in. Now the most famous conductor was Harriet Tubman, and she helped slaves escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad. She famously said that she had never lost any passengers, and I think she freed over 300 slaves. So she is somebody who I think we should look to for any kind of hero we're looking for at this time. Definitely Harriet Tubman would be somebody that showed that courage to go back into such a dangerous location and really become something that we needed at that time to get those slaves to move north. All right, so let me go back real quick. Okay, I'm going to go back, give you a second if you need to. Pause it if you need to. Alright, so that's it for the notes. The assignment that you're going to go to is going to be on Canvas, and it's going to be the abolitionist activity. It's the only one that's going to be on there. And I'm going to give you the rest of the day today, the rest of class time, and then I'm going to give you class time tomorrow. It will be due, though, tomorrow.